I know, you clicked on this video and you are wondering,
Beck, why did you go see Regretting You?
Well, I'm gonna be 100% brutally honest with you guys. My best friend and I were bored on a Saturday night. And I had seen the trailer for Regretting You, and sue me if you want, I actually thought the trailer looked pretty good. I actually thought the film looked interesting. So then why am I making this video? Well, I want my money back. I went into Regretting You thinking it was going to be just your basic sad family romantic drama. Turns out I was wrong. The movie had potential to be a perfectly average film, and it couldn't even succeed at that. And because I'm a writer, I'm an author, little book plug back there, right? When I see that a film is abandoning even the basic structures that make a story good, well, I want to talk about it. So what's going on? Well, Regretting You is a book-to-film adaptation of the book by the same name by Colleen Hoover, and it released in theaters October 24th. It stars McKenna Grace, Mason Thames, Dave Franco, and Allison Williams. The story is described as this. When a devastating accident reveals a shocking betrayal, Morgan Grant and her daughter Clara explore what's left behind as they confront family secrets, redefine love, and rediscover each other. Now, this movie has a 6 out of 10 on IMDb, a 28% Rotten Tomatoes score from critics, but an 85% audience rating. Let's take a look at some of these reviews, shall we? Rebecca Onion from Slate says, Regretting You will aggravate anyone with a low tolerance for watching easily resolvable misunderstandings persist throughout a story, driving unnecessary conflict. Adrian Horton from The Guardian says, at a too long 2 hours, Regretting You is at once mild and bumpy. Any momentum jolted by basic hits of mourning or uninspired romance, mechanical delivery, and off-timed humor. Ouch. But let's look at some audience reviews. From Brian N., another Colleen Hoover masterpiece. Someone said, I took my daughter and her best friend somewhat begrudgingly, as I'm not typically interested in these kinds of films, but by the end we were pre-ordering it on Prime. Obviously there are some critics who like the film and there are some audience members who didn't like the film, so there is some overlap here, but generally speaking, these critics have very, very low opinion of the film and audiences have a very favorable opinion of the film. Well, the reason, and I'm gonna be blunt with this, critics tend to have a very, very, very broad exposure to lots of films, as well as a deeper understanding and an obligation to hold these films to objective standards for stories. And I am going to use the word objective because we're going to talk about that in a second, that there are actually, in the thousands and thousands and thousands of years that we have humans documenting their storytelling abilities, we have found certain objective standards to apply to storytelling. But let's get into this breakdown of Regretting You. Number 1, premise does not equal plot. Now, I actually already talked about premise a lot when it came to my Fixing Snow White 2025 video, which
you guys should definitely go watch because I actually really enjoyed making that video. It's probably one of my favorites I have up here.
But a premise is essentially this: what the audience knows about the story before they read it, or in the case of a movie, what they know about the movie before they go watch it. And for Regretting You, I actually already gave you the premise earlier in this video. It's, quote, when a devastating accident reveals the shocking betrayal, Morgan Grant and her daughter Clara explore what's left behind as they confront family secrets, redefine love, and rediscover each other. Now, the premise is different than the inciting incident, and I'm going to talk about the inciting incident next, but they are technically two separate things. Usually the premise will include the inciting incident, but the premise is not solely the inciting incident. And the other point about premise is that a premise is not spoilers. It's not a spoiler for me to come on here and say that Allison's husband and her sister died in a car accident and that's how they found out that they were having an affair. It's not a spoiler because it is what you're supposed to know about the film before you go watch it. Now for my book, I also have a premise. You can find that in the blurb. I'm gonna read it for you guys so you guys can get an example of how this works in book format. 15-year-old Silas Roman just wants to graduate early with his best friend. Instead, he's attacked by a monster with spinning eyes and rescued by strangers who take him to Noontide, an island where Genema like him train to control their unstable abilities. Just one problem: Silas was supposed to arrive 6 years ago. Determined to catch up, he throws himself into training and trying not to panic every time he accidentally explodes something. But when attacks start happening again, Silas is forced to team up with the 3 most frustrating Genema on the island. With trust so hard to come by, these unlikely friends are the only ones who know the truth about his abilities, the horrible things he's done with them, and the danger that everyone is in. So it's not a spoiler for me to say,
Hey, Silas gets attacked at his school by a monster and gets rescued and taken to Noontide.
that's not a spoiler.
That's the premise.
But if you're reading that blurb, you intrinsically know that there has to be more to the story than what is included in the blurb. Questions like, who rescues him? Why are they rescuing him? Why are they taking him to Noontide? Why is he 6 years late? Why was he getting attacked? Who are these friends? Why is trust so hard to come by? Why do attacks start happening again, right? You understand intrinsically that there has to be more to this book than is in the blurb. Now, this becomes a problem when you have a trailer like Regretting You, because I watched that trailer and I'm automatically thinking, wow, they're giving me a lot of information. Car accident, the affair, McKenna's in love with Mason, Allison is in love with Dave. As I'm watching this trailer, I'm thinking there has to be more to the film than is included in the trailer. And there wasn't. When we walked out of that theater, the first thing my friend said to me was,
This movie could have been an email.
let's think for a second. Why is it that you can't have a movie full of information that you already gave your audience before they came to see the movie? Well, your viewer is going to be bored. This is what I mean when I say objective standards for story. There are certain things that happen with stories simply because it just logically makes sense. A premise is supposed to give us a setup for how the characters are going to adapt and change to the circumstances that they are living through, and therefore we as the audience are interested in how they are going to adapt and change. Instead, Regretting You cycles the exact same plot point over and over and over again. Scene formats go a little something like this. Dead family, I'm sad. Dead family, I'm angry. Dead family, I'm horny. The entire premise is just background noise for the entire film, instead of just setting up our characters for a meaningful arc where they can discover for themselves how they feel about the dead family. Our next story beat is the inciting incident. Now, the inciting incident is defined as this. It's something that happens that causes the character to make a choice that is going to affect the rest of the plot moving forward. Now, if you caught that, the inciting incident is technically two separate components, an external component and an internal component. So in a case like Hunger Games, the inciting incident is Primrose getting her name reaped for the Hunger Games. However, the inciting incident has to be followed by an internal component. And in the Hunger Games, the internal component is Katniss Everdeen volunteering in place of her sister. Now, even if Katniss didn't volunteer for her sister, that would still be an internal component because it would be a choice that the character made in response to the external component. So in Regretting You, we have a very clear external component. The dad and the aunt die in a car accident and they were having an affair this entire time. But the internal component gets a little tricky. What is the choice that the character makes that is going to affect the rest of the plot moving forward? Well, I'm gonna be honest, I don't really know. You could say that the internal component is Allison not telling McKenna that her dad and aunt were having an affair. But you could also say that it's McKenna not telling Allison that she was the last person to text her aunt, and therefore McKenna blames herself for her aunt's death. Now, could you argue that those decisions that I just said that those two characters make could count as the fear-based decision that's logically meant to follow the inciting incident? No, you really can't. Why? Because those decisions don't actually affect the plot moving forward. We never get a hint that maybe McKenna suspects that Allison is keeping secrets from her and that's why McKenna is acting a certain way. We also never suspect that Allison thinks McKenna might be blaming herself for the accident and that's why they're acting this way. Their secrets don't actually affect the plot. They simply act as excuses for the characters to do whatever the storytellers want them to do in a certain scene. And that is all this film is, my friends. Regretting You is just a cycle of sad, sad excuses. The story never gives us any reason for why these characters are doing what they're doing other than
they're grieving.
when you have the inciting incident, everything the characters do must logically follow from the reactions to that first inciting incident. If the inciting incident was actually doing its job, it would force Allison and McKenna to make all sorts of decisions based on their decision to keep secrets from each other. And that leads me to point number 2, which is that trauma also does not equal a plot. Having a sad thing happen is simply not enough to make an entire movie out of. Even if you don't want to go into all the details with me about 3-act story structure or 7-act story structure or Save the Cat story structure, there's a lot of story structures out there and you could spend hours researching them. Lord knows I have. Even if you don't want to go into all that, we all intrinsically understand the basic concept of cause and effect. That is the most basic, bare bones story structure that is out there. Character makes a decision, character faces consequences of their decision, or action, reaction, or setup, payoff. Everything that happens needs to be followed by something that would logically happen in the aftermath of that action. Now, here's some examples of how Regretting You completely breaks that. McKenna picks up Mason hitchhiking. Then she follows him to his house, upstairs to his room, alone, while knowing he has a girlfriend, and also knowing he doesn't even follow her on Instagram. And she's doing all this just so she can get a couple bucks back from him so that he can pay for her Dollar Tree flip-flops that broke while she was helping him. How does any of that logically follow? Or what about you suspect that you might not actually be the biological father of your son? So you leave your baby at your grieving sister-in-law's house and refuse to take him back or even get a paternity test or maybe call your mother to take care of him. You just leave and don't answer the phone or anything. And this movie is chock full of this. It's full of actions and decisions that logically don't make sense, but get excused because
Trauma! We're all traumatized here.
Characters just say and do whatever they want, and it's almost shocking to us as the audience because we have no way to predict what's going to happen next. First, people are crying and then they're making out. People are screaming at the wall and then they're leaving their babies on people's doorsteps. We don't have a framework for what is supposed to happen, and so all that happens is just stuff.
Stuff just keeps happening in this film.
It is a subtle difference, but that is honestly the deciding factor between an average movie that follows cause and effect and a truly terrible film. Because even truly average films, like think Hallmark films, understand basic concepts of cause and effect. They understand setup and payoff. But that leads me to my final point, and that is the art of an average movie resolution. Right now, movies are being built around vibes
Or trauma.
rather than story. And the key problem with that is that emotion itself is not movement. It can express a scene, but it can't progress a scene unless the character expressing the emotion makes a decision based on the emotion that they are expressing. But right now, instead of telling stories, filmmakers are chasing vibes. They think if a movie feels emotional, it is emotional. But instead, when characters just randomly start bursting into tears or screaming at each other, we feel like an awkward third party watching this because what is going on? And if you're gonna sit here and you're gonna think, well, you know, sometimes people act illogically. That is absolutely true. But the thing is, movies aren't real life. Movies are supposed to teach an audience something. And we can't learn anything if we don't understand anything. If someone in a movie bursts into tears, we should have an accurate understanding of why they're doing it, either before, during, or after they burst into tears. At some point, our questions should be answered. And the biggest place I see this issue is the resolution and the denouement. And the resolution in story is defined as the place where we wrap up loose ends. The whole point of a resolution is to answer questions, show how the characters have recovered from the climax as we move towards the final scenes of the film. Then we have the denouement. And if you don't know what a denouement is, it's just the ending scenes. It's the closing scenes of the film or the book. In Regretting You, the denouement is Mason showing his promposal to McKenna. Now, to understand the resolution and the denouement, I need to give you a little bit of a spoiler, and that is that the climax is the fight between Allison and McKenna, where McKenna learns that her dad was having an affair. McKenna and Allison learned that the whole point of this film is, quote, love, even amid the mistakes and conflicts, is worth the effort to be happy. So then following the climax, we have the resolution. Dave Franco and Allison Williams start dating, as do McKenna and Mason. But in the denouement, we learn that Mason has apparently loved McKenna this whole time. And to show his love, by the way, he dated multiple other people, never followed her on Instagram or interacted with her in real life, and made really weird vlogs about her in case they ever did start dating. Remember my point about story beats that don't logically follow? Why would we be learning that love is worth the mess, and then the final scene is a promposal? I found it really funny because this article about the film asks at the beginning of the film, and it says, in Regretting You, infidelity leads to death. And while those characters are wiped out of the story with jarring speed, not only do their surviving loved ones have to grieve the loss of their partners, but also question their entire relationships. How long has this been going on? Were any of their relationships even real? And the kicker is that in the resolution, the place where all of our questions are supposed to be answered, none of these questions are answered. By the end of the film, we don't know how long they were having an affair. We don't understand if any of these relationships were real. All we know is grief and drama. Grief and drama, grief and drama. None of our questions get answered. We don't even know by the end of the film if Dave's baby is really his baby or not. Instead of getting a denouement that actually resolves the ending moments of this film, we get this cheap promposal that overshadows the real questions that audiences are having about the film. I don't need a denouement that answers the question of, does Mason truly love McKenna? I got that clear enough from the thousands of makeout sessions and the jaw clenching every time McKenna said something. Okay, the Mason hate is slipping through. I need to move on. I want to know the answers to the real questions, and Regretting You doesn't seem to have any. But unfortunately, that is exactly what I should have expected from a film that uses trauma and tragedy as shock material and an excuse for characters to have emotional outbursts, and not as a stepping stone to show characters growing in grief, love, and family. A story isn't meaningful because it's tragic. It's meaningful because a tragedy forces characters to change, and by extension, forces us to change. So ironically, I don't actually regret watching Regretting You because I think it is a perfect opportunity for us to understand what happens when emotion replaces craft. Because the truth is, an average movie that understands story structure, setup, and payoff, and genuine character growth is always going to outshine a prestige film that only seems to know how to cry. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and let me know in the comments down below whether you saw this film or what you thought of the film. If you want to see more videos like this, you can go ahead and hit that subscribe button. For whatever reason, YouTube is not showing these videos to my subscribers in their For You page when the video comes out. So make sure you click the actual notification button so that you can be notified when the video comes out. It's just YouTube being weird. I don't know what the deal is, but just click that notification button so that you can get notified. Thank you so much for being here, and see you guys in the next video. Bye.